Our forests have been through a lot, and so have the people who live here. Replanting trees is one way we can begin to bring life back to the land. In this video, we'll share what you need to know about getting seedlings, making a plan that fits your property, and planting trees in a way that gives them the best chance to thrive. With each tree, you're helping the land recover and strengthening the watershed we all depend on.
Trees play a lot of important roles in forest ecosystems. They're responsible for a lot of our good air quality in New Mexico. They help anchor and stabilize the soils on our mountains here in northern New Mexico. Their root systems play a really important role in preventing erosion, preventing landslides and slumping on steep slopes. They provide food and habitat for the wildlife that live in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains up here. And of course, they're just beautiful, provide for a lot of good recreation opportunities for folks to get back out in the woods and connect with the land. So after a fire, especially in a high severity burn area, those dead trees, as soon as those trees are dead, their roots will also start to decay. Those roots are really important for holding soil on the site. And that leads to a situation where we're going to have a period of very high erosion potential. Depending on the rain event, of course, in northern New Mexico, we have this monsoon-based, water cycle. And when we get those really heavy, long rains in such a short period of time, the intensity of that precipitation on those high-severity fire sites where the roots have been burned out, a lot of that soil is going to move downslope and just wash away. Some of the biggest challenges are like the erosion we've discussed on those high severity sites. That site is going to have that hot sun beating down on it that much hotter all day. It's going to get that much colder at night because there's no canopy to insulate the site and hold a little bit more of that heat down in the ground. And so between that combined with the wind blowing across it that's going to dry it out that much more, the lack of roots, basically the lack of, roughness, you could say, from vegetation on the surface that would help slow down water movement and help that water soak in. With that vegetation, those roots gone, it's not just a problem for erosion, but it's also a problem for that water being able to soak in, to provide soil moisture on the site for things to germinate and start growing again. And so, the challenges really kind of all relate to those environmental extremes that we see on a site after a big fire.
With climate change occurring, it's important to note that some things that were historically true may not be possible for a future condition. So what was once ponderosa pine forests may not become a ponderosa pine forest again. And so there is likely to occur some level of species shift going forward into the future with disturbances. So you have these fires and the recovery after that fire, both natural and artificial regeneration may be a mix of, a species shift into something different and a continuation of that same forest type. And it all depends on the conditions of those environments. So there's no magic wand or magic bullet that says it's going to be this.
So almost always, whenever we're working with a landowner, one of our first recommendations would be for that landowner to contact their district forester's office. So the New Mexico Energy Minerals Natural Resources Department has a forestry division, and that forestry division has district offices that cover the whole state. And so it's the job of the foresters in those district offices to be able to come out and help provide some guidance, provide advice and help landowners that have been affected by fires figure out how to start the process of coming up with a stewardship plan or a recovery plan for that land.
Hi, I'm Shannon Atencio. I'm the District Forester for the Las Vegas District for New Mexico Forestry Division, and we're located here in Las Vegas, New Mexico. Our office is out at Story Lake State Park, and we are here to provide technical assistance to landowners. And in the last few years, that's included post-fire recovery and advice on reforestation. So if you just in general are looking for advice on managing your forest, we're here for that. And then for the post-fire information, we are here for that as well. So if you need assistance with that type of work, give our office a call. Our landline phone number is 505-425-7472. And our foresters can come out to your property and walk the property with you and start to put together a plan for post-fire, which can include planting and reforestation.
So when we're thinking about what species to reintroduce after a fire, a lot of times we start by looking at what was growing on that site beforehand. That'll give us a first idea of, what might be adapted to that site. But that might not always be a perfect indicator of what we should try to reforest on that site. The conditions have obviously changed a lot from before to after the fire. Once we have an idea of the type of ecosystem, what sort of, species were there before fire, that can help us think about, what would be the species that would be earlier successional, more pioneer type species that would be good to jumpstart that type of ecosystem again on that site. We also want to think about what will survive, what can we get established on that very extreme, harsh post-fire site.
To me, it's like there's this chronological order of how this all works. As a landowner, the objective really is to kind of come up with a reforestation plan. So that reforestation plan is really about your management objectives and then tying that to the landscape in which you're trying to plant trees and restore this environment that has been affected by fire. And again, that plan should be in concert with a local forestry professional. And you can be working with your district state forest representative, you can work with the Forest Service, you can work with extension offices, you can work with a private forestry consultant. But at the end of the day, coming up with that reforestation plan with the professional is very important. And so once you start working on that plan and understanding what your objectives are and what the landscape is like, then you can start putting together, this list of things that you need to do. And the first thing you need to start thinking about is what is the species and sources that you need to be planting? Because the most important thing to start with is seed. So for me, the best start for that is to work with your local nurseries. And there are very few within the Southwest that can do this, because the goal is you want to use the right seed source and you want to produce the right quality seedling. So there's just a few programs really within the Southwest region that work. Colorado State University has a really good nursery program. The John T. Harrington Forestry Research Center, as well as the Future New Mexico Reforestation Center, offer a great program. There's a program at Northern Arizona University, and then there's a few tribal programs that work really well too. So these collectively are kind of the nursery programs that could potentially give you the right seedling for restoration efforts. You're a land manager, you have an objective, but you still, at the end of the day, want the best quality tree.
When we're thinking about species that we might want to prioritize for reforestation after some of these severe fires, ponderosa pine is pretty high on the list. That in many of these stands that have burned, it was a significant portion of the stand before the fire. It's, as a species, pretty well adapted to those sites. And as far as our tree species in northern New Mexico goes, it's relatively tolerant to fire. Probably the next two on the list, we'd be thinking about Douglas fir That's another one when we get a little higher on the slope above where we would usually find ponderosa pine. Douglas fir is going to be one of the pioneer species on that site that's a little more disturbance and fire adapted. And then in riparian areas, we'd probably be thinking more about maybe some aspen for areas where there would be enough soil moisture that might be a good species to help stabilize stream banks and riparian areas up in those watersheds that have burned.
So seedlings that will be used for reforestation purposes are grown here at the JTH Forestry Research Center under two different conditions. We have a fully environmentally controlled greenhouse where we could control the temperature and the lighting, and we have irrigation. And then we have a passive greenhouse, which is using a little bit more ambient conditions and is really great for hardening off our seedlings, which means preparing them for planting. So those are the two main environmental conditions in which we grow. The current production capacity here at the John T. Harrington Forestry Research Center is about 250,000 seedlings per year, which is about 8,000 square feet of greenhouse space. If you think about what we can grow and what the demands are, there's a huge gap. So right now for the Southwest region, there's a need of about 5 million seedlings per year. So we're way short. And so that would bump up our growing size to about 160,000 square feet of greenhouse space when we only have about 8,000 right now. So the New Mexico Reforestation Center, which is currently under design, fully developed and full operation, will be at a capacity of about 5 million seedlings per year and about 160,000 square feet of greenhouse space. So we've secured funding for our first phase, which would allow us to grow about 1 million seedlings, which is approximately 36,000 square feet of greenhouse space, which is obviously significantly greater than our current capacity.
So we are currently growing about 40 species here at the research center, ranging from riparian species to high mountain species. And the period of time necessary to grow seedlings that ready for planting depends on the species. So, for example, some of the fastest growing species like aspen would require 4 months. Ponderosa pine, which is our most important species here for reforestation, would be about 6 months, and some of the spruces and firs would take about 9 months of period of time to grow.
If you're a landowner interested in purchasing seedlings, it's best to work with your district forester connected with state forestry through their conservation seedling program. Right now, that is the only and best avenue for acquiring quality seedlings. In the near future, the New Mexico Reforestation Center will expand that operation, which will likely tie into the current conservation seedling program with the state.
So I'm Mike Halverson. I'm manager of Santa Ana Native Plant Nursery. I have been manager since 2011. I have worked with the Pueblo for over 20 years. We focus on native plants for restoration, for pollinators, and for cultural importance. We sell to several different entities for restoration. Hermit's Peak Watershed is one of them. And we like to work with them because they have a lot of wonderful people working with them, and they tend to know their plants fairly well. We also go out and collect our own seed, on a regular basis for general, like cottonwood, willow, New Mexico olive. Also, we do forbs, like Mexican hat and gaillardia. We also have vines like Western Virgin's Bower, the clematis family. So we go out and collect a lot of different plants. Other forbs are milkweed for restoration. But most of the time, if people are looking for something special, we have to either order the seed out or have somebody collect the seed for us. In the nursery, in the greenhouse itself, we probably have well over 10,000 plants in one house, and we have 2 houses, so that could be 20,000 plus. Out in the yard, we could have, as multiple tens of thousands out in the yard. So it just all depends on, what species are needed and so on and so forth. So here at the nursery, we grow in a climate-controlled nursery for number one, where we keep our temperatures at 40 degrees at night and 70 to 75 degrees during the daytime. That kind of helps control the growth habit, doesn't get too hot in here, doesn't get too cold, and it gets a perfect growing habit for each plant that we grow. So in the greenhouse, since it's a controlled environment, plants are generally pretty happy. They've got the right amount of humidity, a right amount of water, a right amount of sun, right amount of cold, right amount of heat. So they grow really well in a greenhouse. Now that being said, we do not fertilize, we do not spray any toxins on any of our plants, which helps when they go out into the field and are planted out into the field, because they're not fertilized, which means synthetic chemicals going into the ground out there, but also the roots are already ready to go into a native soil, which makes them survive a little bit better. So in the climate outside, it's going to be a lot harder, a lot drier, a lot more wind, a lot more sun. So if we can help those plants by not fertilizing, they tend to survive a little bit better out in the open. We focus on mostly natives of the Colorado Plateau. So that's New Mexico olive, that's three-leaf sumac, that's Apache plume, a couple of different junipers, or Rocky Mountain juniper, one-seed juniper, New Mexico rose locust, and several other varieties of plants that are good for that. We have riparian style plants like the false indigo, the clematis, and they are really easy to grow, but yet very good plants to put out in our locale. Most of the time we sell most of our seedlings through contract. So people will call us and they'll say, hey Mike, can you grow 10,000 of this, 5,000 of that, 2,000 of this? And that's usually how we work it. We do grow certain plants to put out in our yard, and then they are up for grabs for whoever needs them, like Hermit's Peak Watershed. Once in a while they'll call and they'll say, hey Mike, do you have 30 5-gallon Apache plume? Do you have 20 chamisa and 5-gallon? Yeah, we have those already ready in the yard, but when it comes to seedlings, it's definitely on a contract. For a homeowner, you can call us, but generally we are wholesale. So you'd have to have a business license in order to purchase from us. But when it comes to growing stuff for your particular property, it's good to have somebody kind of give you an idea of what's on your property, but it's also good to go out on your own property, see if you can identify or at least take pictures of the plants around outside your property to see what's growing, so you can kind of get a better plant list. When it comes to restoration, I do find that a lot of restoration projects start with the trees first. And I feel that it's probably a little bit better to think about the understory first before the trees. So like three-leaf sumac, that's a plant that can grow in full sun, higher elevations. Chamisa, Apache plume, they higher elevations. Golden currant or wax currant, they can grow at higher elevations, but at the same time, they can take full sun. And those plants should, in my opinion, be the plants going out into the restoration plots first before the conifers are planted. Because I think with that, you're gonna have a better success rate.
My name is Carol Beta, and we are at the greenhouse here in Santa Fe at the State Park State Forestry Warehouse. Most of our seed sources are selected by our growers. We actually contract all our growers. Currently, we have 4 different growers. We contract with New Mexico State University, John T. Harrington Research Center up in Mora, and we get some of our seedlings from Colorado State Forest Service Nursery up in Fort Collins. The species we have for landowners range everything from ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, bristlecone pine, blue spruce, all the way down to more like desert shrubs like four-winged saltbush, chamisa. We also have stuff for string bank restoration, riparian restoration, like coyote willow, peach leaf willow, thin leaf alder, red osier dogwood, everything from windbreaks to post-fire restoration, riparian restoration, wildlife habitat, so everything in between. Basically, our whole program is targeted toward landowners in New Mexico for conservation purposes, so we work directly with them. We have an online ordering system. If you don't have computer access, we do have, paper order forms, but we do recommend ordering online if you can. We have 2 seasons, fall and spring. We take orders for spring starting the first Monday of December. Distributions mid-March through late April, early May. And spring starts ordering first Monday of July unless it's July 4th, and then it's the next day. And distributions mid-September through mid-October. So we highly recommend, because the program is just so popular that if you have certain species you want, that you get online and order the first day we open up for ordering. We literally can't keep up with demand, but the whole purpose is for landowners. I mean, we are mandated by the state legislature to have this program, so that's what allows us to run it. It is all self-funded, so whatever we sell to the landowners goes right back into the program to purchase more seedlings. We don't get money to buy seedlings from the legislature. It's not part of the forestry budget. I mean, it speaks to the landowners in New Mexico that it existed this long. I mean, because they're the ones that keep it going.
So when folks are selecting seedlings, always important to talk with the nursery manager to get any information you can about where the seeds came from that were used to grow those seedlings. That's always kind of a first important thing, is to make sure that the seed source that was used to grow the seedlings you're considering for a project, that seed source is going to be compatible and appropriate. One thing that can be especially important for looking at planting stock for post-fire reforestation is trying to find planting stock that has balanced shoot and root characteristics. Because, that above ground portion of the plant that's exposed to the wind, it's exposed to those, hot temperatures during the day that are going to dry it out, and the cold winds at night that are going to dry it out, that above ground portion of the plant that's losing water all the time needs to be balanced with a root system that, on the one hand, is big enough that's the right size to be able to supply enough water and nutrients to the above ground part of that plant. But at the same time, that root system also has to be compact enough that somebody can plant it properly and efficiently on that planting site. I'd say those would be the two biggest things that folks should probably watch out for is, seed source and the seedlings they get, and then making sure they have a good balanced stock type that's likely to do well.
The question of when is the best time period of the year to plant is becoming increasingly more difficult to answer because the weather is quite unpredictable. Climate change and other factors are making it really difficult to predict when the rains happen, when is the best period to match that planting time with incoming rain. That's the key factor here. And the key for a proper reforestation plan would be being adaptable. So the best time of the year would be during the monsoon, but since that's not necessarily happening at the time of the year where we think it will, then we need to be adaptable and maybe switch to a fall planting instead of summer when it would usually happen. And if the fall is too dry or the conditions are not ideal for planting, then we will switch to a spring planting period.
So the best thing to do is identify where to plant. And then at the time of planting, your best friend is actually your planting shovel or planting bar, how you actually get the trees in the ground, because it tells you what those soil conditions are like. And so as you're walking around and you're kind of probing and you're in the Rocky Mountains, you're going to hit a lot of rock. You may find really good areas, and where that shovel goes in well is likely a good place to be planting the tree.
And also, in addition to just soil depth, maybe choose the areas that have some microsite. And by microsite, I mean if there's a log close to it, that would provide some shade and some moisture. If there is a snag, so some of the trees that were burned are still standing, that's a good place to plant because of the same reason. They provide shade, they provide moisture to the seedling.
Before planting, take a moment to look for the right microsite.
you are aiming for a spot with softer soil, some moisture, and a bit of natural protection from sun and wind. You want to avoid sites that are rocky or compacted patches that have heavy ash deposits, or places directly beneath leaning or hazard trees. To prepare your seedling, you want to start by keeping the seedling in its container while you loosen it. Gently roll and compress the sides of the tube, just enough to free the soil without breaking the roots. When it's loose, you want to slide the seedling out carefully by supporting the plug itself. A healthy seedling should come out with its roots intact and moist, ready to plant. To plant, place the dibble straight up and down and push it into the ground to the full depth of the root system. Pull the handle towards you and then away, front to back, not side to side, to open a clean vertical hole.
So the root collar right here at the top of this media depth, that is what we want just at or below soil level when we finish planting this. So I'm just going to drop that dude in the plug a little bit. So notice I actually went a little bit deep on that hole. So like if I let it sit all the way in, that's going to end up being planted too deep. If you have to make a choice about going too deep versus too shallow on it, too deep is better than too shallow. What we really don't want is that closed hole with roots and media, the top of that plug hanging out of there. That's going to be really bad for seedling survival. So you want to make sure all that plug and all those roots are at least at or below soil level there. But we also want to avoid burying half of that seedling. So what you're going to see me do here is I'm going to get my bar in next to here to be ready to close that planting hole. But as I'm closing it, I'm just going to go ahead and pull this seedling up a little bit to make sure it gets pinched in there at the right depth. This is probably something you're going to get familiar with over the day. So I want to make sure the needles are out of the way so that when I put this planting bar in, I'm not crunching a bunch of needles. Two slightly different ways you'll see a planting hole close. So you notice I'm about half a bar's width, like 2-3 inches this side of where I open that hole. Some people you'll see go in like straight vertical next to it to close the planting hole. I tend to go at a really slight angle so that the tip of my planting bar is kind of heading down toward the bottom of that first slit I made, so that'll help close it all the way from the bottom to the top in one motion. So for me, I'll go just a slight angle there. Okay, and here's where it's starting to close enough that I can kind of adjust that depth and it'll sit there now. Got a little friction on it. So now I'm gonna go all the way in. All right, and that's usually easier than your first hole. First hole is usually the worst one. And then I'm just gonna lever that straight forward and closed around that seed. And we'll finish this, but notice how that root collar we talked about, we're not seeing any roots, we're not seeing any blood sticking out of that. Now I made another hole there and it's kind of sloppy. So I'm gonna do that one more time. Close that one up. Then I'm just gonna kind of kick in that second one. And I'm just gonna gently get those needles up and out of the way. And I am just going to very gently do a little baby tree dance around that to just kind of close that in. And so when you're done, you should have that root collar right at the soil level or just a little below it. Shouldn't have any roots, shouldn't have any media sticking out above ground. If you reach down to the base, just 2 fingers, give that tree kind of a little tug, little wiggle. It shouldn't feel loose, it should feel good and snug like it grew there. And once you're there, you're good to go. You got a baby tree in the ground.
So some common mistakes that happen with folks who are attempting to plant trees after a fire is really not putting together a reforestation plan. And the key to that plan is working with a professional forester. Again, that can be a private consultant, somebody from state forestry, and that will really help prevent a lot of the mistakes that are common. It doesn't mean that it's foolproof, but at the end of the day, it's the best start is to come up with a written reforestation plan before you even start ordering seedlings or anything like that. So put it on paper, work with your professional forester, and then from there, you can start developing the right way to put trees in the ground.
So when we're thinking about how reforestation after a fire fits in with the bigger strategy of fire risk management, because on the one hand, we have a lot of stands that are overgrown, they're too dense, they have a lot of fuel buildup in them, and they're high fire risk. On the one end of the spectrum, we have a lot of forests like that right now. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the stands that used to be like that, but have burnt, and we're now trying to reforest them. I think people need to think about forest management as a continuum across the whole lifespan of a forest, from that early reforestation stand initiation stage when, whether it's after a harvest, whether it's after a fire or some other disturbance, we're trying to get trees established to help minimize erosion, to help rebuild habitat, help, basically rebuild that forest. We've got that going on one end of the spectrum, but then just as importantly, on the other end of the spectrum, we have a lot of work to do with thinning stands, with getting ladder fuels and large downwoody debris out of those stands that are overgrown, that are fire risks. And all of it sort of falls under the umbrella of sustainable forest management. Across that whole spectrum, across that whole lifespan of a forest, we have different types of activities that we need to undertake to minimize fire risk and to bring forests of any age, any type, back to a healthy condition. And, that looks like different types of operations, different practices across different developmental stages of that forest. But I like to think of it as all working toward that same overall goal of improved forest health and reduced fire risk.
Every seedling planted brings us one step closer to a healthier, more resilient landscape. By taking action now, you're helping restore the land for future generations, supporting local wildlife, and ensuring that our watersheds thrive. Thank you for your commitment to recovery and for being a vital part of our community's restoration journey.